This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam.
You came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every Year After follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every Year After, now streaming only on Prime.
Highgate Cemetery stands on the northern edge of London, where the city begins to climb towards the heights of Highgate Hill. Beyond the busy roads, beyond the endless movement of buses, cars and commuters, there is a place where Victorian London still lingers. Stone monuments rise among ancient trees. Ivy crawls across forgotten tombs. Pathways twist between mausoleums and catacombs. On misty mornings, it can feel as though the modern city has retreated entirely, leaving only the dead and the memories they left behind. It is one of Britain's most famous cemeteries. It is also one of Britain's most famous haunted places. For many people, the name Highgate Cemetery immediately brings to mind the legend of the Highgate Vampire, a story that exploded across newspapers and television screens during the 1970s and became one of the strangest chapters in British paranormal history. Yet the cemetery's reputation was not built on a single legend. Long before the vampire stories appeared, Highgate had already become a place where history, architecture, folklore and imagination seem to overlap. To understand why so many strange stories became attached to this place, it helps to begin with the cemetery itself. In the early 19th century, London faced a problem that few people today can fully appreciate. The city was growing rapidly. More people meant more deaths, and the old churchyards that had served communities for centuries were struggling to cope. Graves were reopened again and again. Burial grounds became overcrowded. Public health concerns increased. The old system was simply no longer sustainable. A new solution emerged. Large landscape cemeteries began to appear around the edge of the capital, offering space, dignity, and permanence. Highgate Cemetery was one of these new burial grounds, opening in 1839 as part of the collection, later known as the Magnificent Seven. The site chosen was spectacular. Rather than a flat field or open parkland, the cemetery occupied a steep hillside overlooking London. The land had once formed part of the Ashurst estate, and its dramatic contours allowed the designers to create something far more ambitious, other than an ordinary graveyard. Visitors arriving at Highgate entered a carefully planned landscape, where architecture and nature worked together. Every path, terrace, and monument was intended to create an impression. Even today, some of the most remarkable Victorian funerary architecture in Britain survives here. The Egyptian Avenue remains one of the cemetery's defining features. Passing through its great stone entrance, visitors enter a shadowed avenue lined with family vaults, a design influenced by Victorian fascination with Egypt and the mysteries of death. Beyond lies the Circle of Lebanon, arranged around a great cedar tree that predated the cemetery itself. Beneath the terraces, vast catacombs providing resting places for hundreds of coffins. For Victorian families, burial at Highgate became a mark of status. The cemetery was admired, visited, and written about. It quickly became fashionable. Wealthy Londoners purchased plots and commissioned elaborate monuments. The cemetery's success was such that additional land had to be acquired on the opposite side of Swains Lane. The eastern extension eventually opened in 1860, connected to the original cemetery by a tunnel beneath the road. As the years passed, Highgate became a place where much of Victorian and modern Britain seemed to gather. Scientists, artists, writers, politicians, reformers and musicians all found their final resting place here. Michael Faraday lies within the cemetery. George Eliot rests here. Karl Marx's grave became one of the most visited monuments in the country. Elizabeth Siddell, model, artist and wife of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, is buried nearby. Tom Sayers, the celebrated bare-knuckle prizefighter, lies beneath a monument watched over by a stone sculpture of his dog, Lion. More recently, figures such as Bert Jansch, Malcolm McLaren, George Michael, and Roger Lloyd Pack have joined the long roll of names associated with Highgate. The cemetery is also a place of quieter remembrance. Among the thousands of graves are more than 300 Commonwealth war dead from both World Wars. Their presence serves as a reminder that Highgate is not merely a Victorian curiosity, but a continuing record of lives lived across nearly 2 centuries. Yet despite its early success, change eventually came. By the beginning of the 20th century, the age of the Grand Victorian Cemetery was fading. Families moved away. Burial fashions changed. Income declined. Maintenance became increasingly difficult. The decline was gradual at first, then it accelerated. The First World War took away many of the men responsible for maintaining places like Highgate. Economic difficulties followed. By the middle of the 20th century, the cemetery was struggling. Buildings began to deteriorate. Paths became harder to maintain. Vegetation spread unchecked. By the 1960s, parts of Highgate looked very different from the carefully ordered landscape envisioned by its founders. Trees grew through railings, ivy swallowed monuments, entire sections disappeared beneath undergrowth. Tombs emerged unexpectedly from dense vegetation. Some paths became almost impassable. Photographs from the period show a cemetery that looked almost abandoned, and it was during this period that the ghost stories truly began. The appearance of a cemetery played a major role. Highgate had become a perfect Gothic landscape. Hammer horror films were popular. Interest in the occult was growing. Britain seemed to be rediscovering ghosts, witches, and supernatural mysteries. Against that backdrop, stories began to emerge. One of the earliest involved a man who claimed to have seen a strange figure staring through the cemetery gates. He described glowing red eyes, watching him from within the darkness. Others wrote to local newspapers, describing unusual encounters around Swains Lane. Some were vague, others were more specific. A cyclist was reportedly seen travelling along the lane before disappearing from sight. Several witnesses described a tall man wearing a top hat. A woman dressed in white was reportedly seen among the graves. A pale figure was said to drift between monuments. What made these stories unusual was not their consistency. In truth, they were remarkably inconsistent. Witnesses described different figures in different places at different times, yet they all pointed towards Highgate. The cemetery was becoming a focus for local folklore. Among the various reports, one figure appeared repeatedly. Witnesses described a tall, dark shape moving among the graves. Details varied considerably. Some mentioned glowing eyes, others described only a dark human silhouette. A few claimed the figure moved silently through the cemetery. There was never a single agreed description, but the idea of a dark presence gradually took hold. The story might have remained a local curiosity had it not been for a sighting reported by a local resident named David Farrant. On Christmas Eve 1969, Farrant claimed to have seen a grey apparition near the cemetery. He later wrote to the Hampstead and Highgate Express, describing what he had witnessed. His letter attracted attention. More importantly, it encouraged others to come forward. Soon, the newspaper was receiving additional reports from readers who claimed to have experienced strange encounters around Highgate. The stories varied enormously, but together they created a sense that something unusual was happening around the cemetery. Then another figure entered the story. Sean Manchester became convinced that the various reports could be explained by a single cause. According to Manchester, the cemetery was haunted, not by a ghost, but by a vampire. It was a claim that transformed everything. Ghost stories had become vampire stories. Local folklore became a national sensation. The newspapers seized upon it. Television crews arrived. Public curiosity exploded. Throughout 1970, the story gathered momentum. Reports became increasingly dramatic. Some claimed the mysterious figure caused sudden drops in temperature. Others suggested watches stopped working in its presence. Stories emerged of dead animals being found nearby. Explanations became more elaborate. The alleged vampire was eventually given a backstory involving black magic and Eastern Europe, though none of these details could ever be substantiated. What had begun as a collection of unrelated sightings had become a modern legend. The peak came in March 1970. Following television appearances and newspaper coverage, crowds descended upon Highgate Cemetery. Hundreds of people arrived hoping to witness supernatural activity, or even participate in a hunt for the supposed vampire. Police attempted to control access. They failed. Walls were climbed, gates were breached, curiosity seekers flooded into the cemetery. No vampire was found. What followed instead was damage. Tombs were disturbed, memorials were vandalized. Rumors spread faster than facts. The cemetery, already struggling through years of neglect, suffered further harm at the hands of those determined to uncover evidence of the supernatural. Yet despite the absence of proof, the legend refused to disappear. If anything, it became stronger. Alongside the vampire stories, older reports continued to circulate. One of the most persistent concerns a woman dressed in white. Witnesses have described seeing her standing quietly among the monuments of the Western Cemetery before vanishing from sight. Details vary depending upon the source, and no clear identity has ever been established. Another story concerns a figure often referred to as the Shrouded Woman. According to reports, she appears among the graves, staring into the distance. Witnesses who attempted to approach claimed the figure vanished, only to reappear elsewhere in the cemetery. As with many Highgate stories, the details are impossible to verify. The reports remain part of the folklore rather than the established fact. Perhaps the most intriguing story concerns an elderly woman reportedly seen moving among the graves. Descriptions portray her as searching desperately through the cemetery. Local legend claims she is looking for her children. Other suggestions suggest she lost them long ago. No historical evidence supports any particular explanation. but the story remains one of the most frequently repeated ghost legends associated with Highgate. Then there is the cyclist. Unlike the vampire or the woman in white, the cyclist feels strangely ordinary. Witnesses described seeing a lone rider travelling along Swains Lane before simply disappearing. No dramatic manifestation, no terrifying encounter, just a cyclist who was there one moment and gone the next. Perhaps that simplicity is what makes the story memorable. There have also been reports of footsteps heard on otherwise empty paths, bells ringing when no source could be identified, whispers among the trees and fleeting figures glimpsed between monuments. None can be proven, yet together they form part of the strange tapestry of stories that has gathered around Highgate over the decades. What makes the cemetery remarkable is not necessarily any individual account. Many cemeteries have ghost stories. Many old buildings accumulate folklore. What makes Highgate different is the way history, architecture, decline, media attention and folklore all converged at precisely the right moment. The overgrown cemetery of the 1960s provided the perfect setting. The public fascination with the supernatural provided the audience. The newspapers provided the platform. The result was a legend that continues to endure more than half a century later. Today, Highgate Cemetery is different from the neglected landscape that gave birth to the vampire panic. Thanks to the work of the Friends of Highgate Cemetery Trust, the grounds have been carefully preserved. Paths have been restored, monuments conserved, wildlife protected. Visitors now come to admire the architecture, explore the history, and pay their respects to the famous and ordinary people buried here. Yet even now, as evening settles over the cemetery and the last visitors leave, it is easy to understand why the stories survive. The winding paths remain. The monuments still emerge unexpectedly from the trees. The catacombs still descend into shadow, and the silence still allows the imagination to wander. Perhaps that is why Highgate continues to occupy such a unique place within Britain's haunted landscape. Not because anyone ever proved the existence of a vampire, not because every ghost story is true, but because few places bring together history, folklore, and atmosphere quite so completely. In the end, Highgate Cemetery remains what it has always been. A place of remembrance, a place of history, and a place where stories, whether true, mistaken, or imagined, continue to linger among the stones. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy these stories, you can support the podcast and get access to MP3s over on Buy Me a Coffee. They're £1.50 each, or free if you're a member. You can find everything at ghosttales.co.uk and follow on Facebook and Instagram at Ghost Tales Podcast.
The 2026 FIFA World Cup meal at McDonald's is underway with one of 9 legendary cups in the lineup. Christian Pulisic, David Beckham, Lamine Yamal, Ronaldinho, Thierry Henry, Son Heung-min, Alphonso Davies, Santi Jimenez. And between the posts, it's Grimace. Get one of 9 collectible cups with a FIFA World Cup meal.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last. All rights reserved. 2026 McDonald's at FIFA World Cup 2026.